Hi gang, Rob here. It is the evening of 14 June 2021. Coming to you this evening with a good old-fashioned knife review on this knife right here. Something I picked up over the weekend at the, wait for it, Great Eastern Cutlery Rendezvous. Yep, no kidding really. This is the Spyderco Native Chief, made in Golden, Colorado, USA Earth. Designers Sal and Eric Glesser. This one sporting a blade of CPM-REX45 high-speed particle metallurgy tool steel, wearing the G10 handles in burnt orange. So there's a little story about how this came to be in my pocket over the weekend. Some of you GEC fans may be aware of a young gentleman named Logan Stout, who is the proprietor of Knife Thoughts. Logan is a very cool guy, a GEC devotee of the highest order, and sort of manages some of their fan functions on social media. It doesn't work for GEC, just as a fan. And he had a table at the rendezvous with some pretty cool GEC knives in it, some of them for sale, and then he had a couple modern folders for sale. An AD20, what is it, an AD20.5, the small FRN handled Demco production AD20, and then he had this knife. And you know, I like Logan, I like talking to him, and I walked by this table a bunch of times. Every time I walked by, I picked up this knife. He owned two of these, and this was sort of his user, which is interesting, and well, I'll show you why as we progress, because it's held up rather well. The Native Chief, yep, the Native Chief, the large version of kind of the Spyderco Native 5, and it's a lot larger. So the Chief has a 4 1/16 inch blade backed up by a 5 1/16 inch handle. So considerably larger than the Native 5, like a third larger. The regular Native 5 has a 3-inch blade and a 4-inch handle. The little Native 5 weighs in at 3 ounces. This behemoth, with a super skinny distal taper and a thinly ground blade, only weighs 3.9 ounces. 3.9 ounces for the G10 full steel backspacer version of the Native Chief. That is pretty efficient size to weight ratio, I believe. And I gotta say, it's not very often that a knife company makes a larger version of a classic pattern and comes up with something that's better than the original small one. In this case, the Chief is just a better knife than the regular Native 5. I gotta hand it to Spyderco though, because, you know, for what now, almost 30 years, we've had natives in the Spyderco lineup. The knife that started out as something Spyderco didn't even want to build. It was built to sell at Walmart, and it was built without a hump because the guys at Walmart thought the hump looked odd and nobody would buy it. So the original Native has this hole sunk way down into the handle, and frankly, the regular length Native, you're not going to flick that blade out because the hole has to, you know, the arc has to come way up vertically before it starts to head out. You just have to sweep them. That's about all you can do. Not so the Chief. How about that? You can drop it, but you can drop the Native, regular Native too. And I can, even if I scoot up a little bit, I can middle finger flick that sucker. You can't do that with a regular Native, especially a lockback version. So fidget factor, ergonomics of deployment, much better on the Chief than the original native. You know, and I said it's rare that you make a larger version of a knife and keep the design elements that are good. When I say that, I'm thinking regarding Spyderco of the Manix 2 XL, which is, to me, just kind of an abortion of a knife. I owned one for a while. It's not as strong as the regular Manix, and it's just not good. The Chief, however, the native Chief, is just a far better knife than a native 5, albeit in a much different size class. This would be not only a great large EDC with that super thin tip, it's also, you know, it fits into that large tactical folder class. Don't believe me? Well, here it is, next to, let's do it this way so you can see that police edge. Here it is, next to a Spyderco Police. Now, all I have are stainless handle polices. I have 2 of them. But let's just compare it dimensionally to the Police 3 G10. Okay? Native Chief, 4 1/16 blade. Police 3 G10, 4 3/8, so a bit longer. Handle length, 5 1/16 on the Native Chief. 5 9/16 on the Police 3 G10. So obviously the Police 3 is a little bit larger knife, but not much. You still have a 4+ inch blade on the Native Chief. Not too many tactical folders can say that. I didn't measure the handle thickness. Let's do that. It is just about 7/16 thick, so under half an inch thick. Blade stock is an 1/8 inch. Now they've made this knife, I think, in a few different steel and handle combinations. My buddy James Barnes at the Rendezvous was carrying a Native Chief in solid carbon fiber scales with the S90V blade, and I think they made a black G10 S30V version. I was pretty excited to see this one in CPM-REX45. I owned a Manix 2 lightweight in Rex45 and sold it. I'm just not a big fan of that FRN Manix, but I love me some burnt orange G10, and that's what this is. So I bet you I walked past Logan's table and stopped and talked to Logan 6 or 7 times over 2 days, and you know, he told me a price when I first saw the knife, and you know, 6 visits later I just handed him the money. Now Logan said that he has used this knife fairly extensively, and if you notice, this is not a from the sharpening bench video, and I have not sharpened this knife. I took it to the post office today as I was preparing about 25 packages for delivery and opening several, since I hadn't been to the post office since last Wednesday. So it did some tape, it did some cardboard. I'm not sure what Logan put it through, but it wasn't a new knife when I got it. And this is how the Rex45 is holding up, just so you know. That's like the best factory Spyderco edge I've ever seen. It's push cut and Natchez Shooter Supply catalog paper. And that's kind of the test I give the knives I sharpen. You know, will it slice and then push cut newsprint or thin magazine or catalog paper? And this does it after having been used quite a bit. It's toothy, and this steel likes to be toothy. Before we get into the steel, let's just talk a little bit about ergos. You saw the deployment of the knife in a variety of methods, and it is on the bushing pivot just like the regular Native 5. So you've got 2 thin phosphor bronze washers that are captured against the blade tang, and then enough space left to the handle scales for the desired action. It's a little different than a Chris Reeve bushing pivot. This is actually a stepped stop pin that emulates a bushing, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's see the closing action. You're going to see the blade drop freely until it sort of comes in contact with the cam of the tang against the lock bar, just to stop it from coming over and whacking your fingers. But everything is beautiful. Lockup is rock solid in both directions. Blade centering is beautiful. Let's see. In a rearward saber grip, very comfortable, and thumb still contacts jimping. Then if you move forward into the 50-50 choil, I've still got jimping underneath my thumb, but I've now turned it into more of an EDC length knife. Hammer grip is nice, even if I come forward. Draw cut grip just fine. Overhand pinch just fine. And then the only grip that's not great is that sort of vertical draw cut grip. I get a lot of horn in my palm that way, but not a big deal. This is probably the grip you're going to use most, is that forward saber or the pinch. You can even come forward with the pinch on that. It likes it a lot. So solid ergonomics. For me, better than the police. I'd have a military down here, but it's in the safe room and my wife is sleeping and I don't want to wake her up to get it. But very similar in size to a military. Again, I think better ergos than a military. Super solid effort. And it's one of those knives that I think I've sold one of these on my weekly knife sale, and it kind of went by and I didn't pay it much mind. I thought, wow, that's a lot of leaf-shaped blade there. And I almost thought it was too much until I handled this one a few times. Well, I handled it enough that I bought it. Yeah. Now, it was used when I bought it from Logan, and then I committed that cardinal sin that we knife fidgeters commit. Never take a knife out of your pocket while driving, play with a little bit, and then set it on the seat between your legs. And then get out of the car in a couple hours to pee and hear it hit the ground, which this one did. So I got a little beauty mark right there, and I got a little beauty mark right there. Yeah. It's mine now. Let's talk a little bit about the steel, shall we? So CPM-REX45 is a crucible product. It is a high-speed particle metallurgy tool steel. Has a high red hardness. That means you can get it very, very warm in use as a finished product after being hardened and tempered. You can get it very, very warm before it loses any real hardness. And it likes to run in the, those low to mid 60s Rockwell. Now, a lot of people might say, why is that important for a knife? Well, when you're finished grinding one of these high tungsten tool steels, you're going to generate some heat because finished grind is done hard. So it's important, if you're finished grinding a knife that's, let's say, 63 or 4 Rockwell, that's going to be very grind resistant. It's beneficial if it'll take some heat before it starts to lose hardness. Witness LMAX by ZT 5 years ago or so, which didn't have that capability. So very much like CPM-M4, it's got a high red hardness. Actually, a couple of years ago when the Delicas and Enduras came out in HAP 40 clad, I did a little comparison video thumping on a piece of wood with the cutting edge of my M4 Gale Bradley and HAP 40 Delica. By the way, HAP 40 is the analog by Hitachi to Rex 45 by Crucible. Both super tough steels. So here's the difference. Rex 45 is a near analog to HAP 40, and I will put up the graph from Z Knives to show you the differences. But basically the difference is HAP 40 has no manganese and no silicon, whereas Rex 45 does. And then versus CPM-M4, REX45 has a little bit less carbon, a little bit more tungsten, a little bit less vanadium, no phosphorus, no sulfur, but the big deal is 8% cobalt in REX45 and HAP40, by the way. So you get high hardness, high hardenability, high working hardness with lots of toughness, high red hardness. What do you give up? Well, sharpenability. It's very grind resistant, tough to sharpen. You're going to need diamonds, guys. The other thing, it will rust. And REX45 doesn't seem to corrode like M4. M4 likes to get pepper spots. REX45 likes to turn brown, almost powdery orange rust. So you're going to need to either live in a temperate to dry climate, or you're going to need to keep this thing oiled. I don't know what these cost when Spyderco does a sprint run of them. Probably about the same as I paid for it, which was, I think I gave Logan $160 for this one. Generally, they'll sell for more than that on the secondary market. Yeah, I kind of like it. Definitely a keeper. It's not a knife I bought at the Rendezvous to resell. This is a knife I kept to own and use, and it has been in my pocket since I picked it up from Logan. Did I buy this Friday or Saturday? One of them. Anyway, I stuck it in my pocket immediately, and it hasn't left, and I can't really find a reason I need to touch the edge because it's freaking stunning. Great job, Spyderco. I think that's about all for this one. So overall conclusions, if you can find one, just buy it. They're going to run this in other combinations of steel and colorations, I'm sure. So buy the steel you like, the handle color you like, the knife as a design and an execution in manufacturing. It is totally squared away, guys. Might be the most comfortable to use 4-inch folding tactical knife I've ever had in my hand. So, I mean, I'm talking about a Recon 1, Benchmade 710, Spyderco Police, Spyderco Military. The list goes on. Great knife. Great knife. I love it. Grace to you and peace, my friends, from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Remember, the word is sharp. Talk to you soon.